Hi everyone, it's Mor Shlomo. Last time we discussed that Paro said to Moshe and Aaron that he will not let the Jewish people go. So God sent them again to speak to Paro and said, next this time you give them a sign from God. Aaron will throw down a stick, it will turn into a snake. And he will know that it's a miracle and that God sent him. So when Aaron came and they said, Aaron and Moshe went to Paro and Aaron threw down a stick, and it turned into a snake. Paro goes, my magicians could do that too. Let me show you. And all the magicians threw down their sticks and they turned into snakes. And then they picked them up again and they turned back into sticks. But when Aaron did that, what Aaron did was he turned his snake back into a stick, and then his stick swallowed all the other sticks. Weird? Yeah. So it was clearly a miracle, but Paro was very stubborn. It's going to be a story of stubbornness. Paro was very stubborn and said, nope, I'm not letting the Jewish people go. And Aaron and Moshe left, and then they spoke to God again. And God said, you know what, Moshe, go down, meet Paro. Paro goes to the Nile River every morning, early in the morning. Go down there, meet him there, and tell him he has his last chance. So Moshe went down there, spoke to Paro, and said, Paro, you have your last chance to let the Jewish people go. This is your only chance. If not, we're going to turn the water into blood. Paro goes, I don't believe you. Or my magicians could do this. No big deal. So here comes the first of 10 plagues. The first plague was blood. God, in Hebrew it's dam. So God had Aaron hit the water, and when he hit the water turned into blood. All the water in Mitzrayim, all the water in Egypt turned into blood. And no matter what, for the Egyptians, the water was blood. But for the Jewish people, it was fine. So even if they shared a cup of water, like one drinking with one straw, one drinking with the other, if they had straws back then, for the Egyptian, it would be blood. For the Jewish person, it would be water. Okay? And this caused a big issue in Mitzrayim and Egypt. And the fish were dying. But the only way that the Egyptians were able to get water is if they bought it from the Jewish people. Paro was still stubborn. He said, I'm still not letting the Jewish people go. So Moshe said, we're going to bring a second plague on you. The second plague was frogs, Sifardea. Now, there are two ways the story goes. One way the story goes is that a bunch of frogs just came swarming in and they jumped everywhere. Another way the story goes, another version, is that there's one giant frog, and when the Egyptians hit the frog, a bunch of baby frogs flew out of its mouth. I like that one better. It's cool. It just sounds cooler to me. So the frogs come, they're jumping everywhere. And you might have heard a song about it, about King Paro. One morning, King Paro woke in his bed. There were frogs on his bed. There were frogs on his head. Frogs here, frogs there. Frogs were jumping everywhere. I think I skipped some of that song, but whatever. That maybe I'll do it in a different video. That still didn't convince Paro. Paro is very stubborn. It still didn't convince him to let the Jewish people go. And now comes another plague. Kinim, lice. Now, it's not just lice that we have, when people get lice and they get checked in school and they check if they have lice and they go home if they have lice. This is like big, giant lice bugs all over the place. It was really bad. It was actually the first plague that the Egyptian magicians weren't able to do. They're able to make frogs, they're able to make water into blood, but they weren't able to do something that's as small as lice. I don't know. I guess maybe it was small lice, but they weren't able to do the plague of lice. Paro goes, I'll let the Jewish people go. And after the plague stops, and he's like, never mind. Then they bring another plague. Arov, wild animals. So these wild animals came, and there are alligators and monkeys and like things that it's not even normal for them to be there. And I've heard that actually their whole habitat came with them. I'm not sure. But all these animals came in, and it caused craziness in Egypt. Yet Paro was still stubborn. He still didn't let the people go. He said, I'll let them go. And as soon as, please pray to your God that it's over. And then, of course, He's like, never mind. I'm not going to let them go. Then came the plague of Dever. This is a disease that happened on all the animals. So the Egyptian animals were dying. And still, Paro says, I'll let the Jewish people go. And then as soon as, the plague stops, he's like, never mind. He was very stubborn about it. And then came another one, Shechem, boils, okay, where they had these big blisters all over them. And it was very uncomfortable. You couldn't sit, but you couldn't stand. You couldn't lay down, but you couldn't scratch them. You couldn't do anything because it hurt so much. And all these plagues were just Egyptians. The Jewish people were fine throughout this whole thing. And Paro goes, okay, if you stop the plague, pray to your God to stop the plague, and I'll let the Jewish people go. And of course he doesn't. Yeah. Next, they bring another plague. I know I'm giving you the abridged version. Borrowed, hail. Now, if you ever seen hail come down from the sky, it's ice, right? But this was a special type of hail. It was ice, a block of ice, but it had fire inside. So the ice will come down, it'll break through something, and then things will get caught on fire. God had the ice and the fire compromise with each other that they don't destroy each other. Ice doesn't put out the fire, and the fire doesn't ruin the ice. So this plague came, and again, Paro says, if you stop this plague, I'll let the Jewish people go. And then, of course, he doesn't. So now we're up to the next one. We're up to number 8. Number 8, locust, arba. It's pretty much like grasshoppers. They came flying in, and what they would do is there's so many of them, they actually covered the sun or blocked out the sun that it became dark. Not pitch black, but pretty dark in Egypt. And they came and they ate all the grains, and they were all over the place. And some Egyptians were like, locusts, I like to eat those anyways, chocolate covered. But as soon as that plague was over, as soon as, same thing, Paro was like, I'll let the people go if you stop the plague. And then, of course, he didn't. All the locusts disappeared from Egypt. Then here comes the 9th plague, Chosha, darkness. It was so dark. It was like a thick dark. If you've ever seen it, like when it's foggy outside and you feel it in the air, they felt this darkness. They couldn't even move. The people, the Egyptians were kind of stuck like this or like this. They're like, hey, Fred, I'm stuck. I can't. So during this plague, the Jewish people were actually able to look around Egypt and see where all their hidden golds were. All the Egyptians hid their gold. But for the Jewish people, it was like a beautiful sunny day. The sun was brighter than ever, but for the Egyptians, it was completely black, dark. Then so Paro goes, I'll let the Jewish people go. But of course he doesn't. Now came the final plague. And the final plague was called Makat Bechorot, where the oldest person from each Egyptian household, the firstborn in each Egyptian household, was going to die. Now, what the Jewish people did was they put something on their house. They took blood from an animal, and they put the blood up, a sheep's blood, and they put it up on the doorposts of their house. And that showed it was a Jewish person. Now, when God came to kill the firstborn of each Egyptian house, he passed over the Jewish houses. Get that? Passover. Think. Yep, name of the holiday. Passed over the Jewish houses and went only to the Egyptian houses. This was the final straw because every house had someone. If the oldest person wasn't even in Egypt anymore, they died. And in every house, there was somebody who died. Every Egyptian house. At this point, Paro goes, fine, let the Jewish people go. They could go. And right then, they took the opportunity, and the Jewish people left. They said, we're leaving right away. Moshe said, let's go. Let's get out of Egypt. The people didn't even have time. They were making dough. They didn't even have time for the dough to cook. So they took their dough, they threw it in their bag, and they escaped. And in the hot sun, the dough started cooking, and it made, yeah, you're right, matzah. Good one. Yeah, I called on you. And they, and it, that's where we get matzah from. So we're going to talk more about this. Let me give you a little bit more. As the Jews were escaping, Paro realized, he goes, when the Jews were out, he says, let's chase after the Jewish people. And he goes to chase after the Jewish people. And you know this story already because you must have heard it before. He goes after the Jewish people. The Jewish people get up to this big river, the big river, the big river. And, and they say, and they go, what are we going to do? How are we going to get around the how are we going to get around this river? What are we going to do? And Moshe raises his hands, and the water splits, and the Jewish people go through, and they're safe. And then the Egyptians try to go through, and the water comes crashing down on them, and the Egyptians are defeated. That is the story of Pesach, the story of how the Jewish people got out of Egypt. There are more details in there, and maybe when we get back to school, we'll talk about it. But I gave you the idea of the story. Our upcoming videos will be talking about Pesach and about some of the different laws and about some songs and different things about Pesach. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.